Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 true ghost stories from the Haunted Canda series. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. A spine-chilling read, Barrie, Ontario. A woman stood alone in the cold, quiet night, waiting for a prescription to be filled at a pharmacy in the Wellington Plaza. Most of the shops in the strip mall were closed and empty, including Rivendell Books. Her gaze drifted as the minutes passed, and then she realized the plaza wasn't as deserted as she had thought. She noticed an elderly, gray-haired man in old-fashioned clothing who looked out of place walking back and forth in front of Rivendell Books. It was as if he was upset that the bookstore was closed and was searching for a way in. Then he found it. He approached the door and stepped straight through the glass. The ghost of the old man is not unknown to the people who work at Rivendell Books. In fact, he might be one of their most loyal customers. He's certainly the most troublesome, frightening patrons as they walk up and down the aisles looking for their next read. Wendy Cahill, the bookstore owner, has said that multiple odd and disturbing occurrences have taken place in the shop. Often late at night when no one else is in the store, many customers, living customers that is, have seen the old man in the history section, and others have even felt him touch them before disappearing. One day while Cahill was in the back, she heard a loud bang in the front of the shop. She rushed through the store, puzzled by the sound and unsure what might have caused it. She found a biography about infamous serial killer Charles Manson lying in the middle of the floor. Someone had thrown it to the ground, but there was no one around. As Cahill stared, somewhat hypnotized, into Manson's cold eyes on the corner of the book, books started flying off the shelves and through the air around her. Books flying off shelves is usually good for business, but Cahill found no comfort in the ghost's antics. She and her husband often stayed late on Saturday nights to clean and organize after the store had closed. No one else entered the store until the Cahills returned early on Sunday mornings, and yet when they made their way into the back the next day, they were regularly met by a disquieting sight. There on the floor of the history section were towers of neatly stacked books reaching high into the air. Most were about World War I and II. It would be one thing if the ghost was content to remain in the store, but that's not always the case. One unfortunate customer purchased a book to read and enjoy, only to learn he had unwittingly invited a bibliophantom into his home. Derek Ellis, a history buff, wanted to learn more about the Great War, so he browsed Rivendell Books' collection, completely unaware that the store he had entered was haunted. He selected a big book about World War I, paid for it, and returned home. He had visited the store by himself, but he did not return home alone. Ellis would soon discover in the middle of the night that he had purchased a book that was one of the old ghost's personal favorites, and the spirit had no intention of missing a single night of reading. A few minutes past midnight, Ellis suddenly woke up and came face to face with the ghost dressed in old-fashioned clothing. He was silently staring at Ellis from the foot of the bed, as if the ghost was angry at Ellis for having purchased the book from the shop. Ellis thought he might still be dreaming, but pinching his face and arms proved that he was awake and the ghost was real. The next day, Ellis did not tell his wife what he had seen for fear of scaring her, and he secretly hoped the midnight appearance would be the last he'd see of the bookstore ghost. It was not. The next night he awoke after midnight again and smelled the strong aroma of flowers, despite the fact there were none in the room. Then, as he was trying to fall back asleep, a chair beside his bed creaked from the weight of someone sitting down on it. When Ellis rolled over and looked at the chair, it was empty. His cat then leaped onto the bed and stared intently at the empty chair as if sizing up some stranger. It left Ellis feeling very uncomfortable. The midnight visits continued for the next few nights. On one occasion, Ellis awoke to see a bright red curtain that hadn't been there before, covering his closet door. After a few minutes, the curtain suddenly disappeared. Another night, Ellis was awoken by the sound of someone flipping through the pages of a book. He looked up and saw the old man standing in front of the closet. The ghost strode toward the bed, returned the World War I book to the nightstand, walked into the closet, waved to Ellis, and disappeared. On the final night, Ellis owned the book. He awoke once more to see the old man pacing the room, deep in thought, while reading the book. The ghost wandered into the closet and disappeared again, and the book fell to the floor with a bang. Ellis had to retrieve it later. Ellis began to fear that he was losing his mind, so as a final desperate measure, he took the book and visited a priest. The clergyman did not laugh or brush off Ellis's concerns, far from it. With deadly urgency, the priest told Ellis he must get rid of the book, and in doing so, get rid of the ghost. Ellis followed the priest's advice and returned the Tome of Terror to Rivendell Books, but he didn't tell Cahill the real reason, the sinister reason, why he had decided to sell it back to the store. A month later, however, he returned and finally revealed the scary story. Ellis thought Cahill might not believe him, but she grabbed his arm and said, "My God, I do believe you." And then in an ominous whisper, she added, "You wouldn't believe what's been going on in the shop." In Rivendell Books, truth is often stranger and scarier than fiction. Demon Hotel, Winnipeg, Manitoba. It was early October in 2012, and the first cool wisps of wintry air had begun to chill downtown Winnipeg's back alleys and shadowy corners. Crunchy, rust-colored leaves swirled across the cracked pavement as the days grew shorter. A photographer and writer who calls himself Urban Explorer had passed by the Demon Hotel, an abandoned apartment building at 44 Hargrave Street, many times. Despite having felt compelled to enter the old building before, he had never built up the courage to do so. It had sat empty for many years, and most of the windows and doors were boarded up. People who lived in the area had reported seeing pale, elongated faces and red eyes peering out from the few windows that hadn't been covered. It was widely believed that some of these entities were demons that had escaped from the underworld. With nervous laughter, locals often say, "When they're not in hell, then stay at the Demon Hotel." Other people have spotted ghosts who tried to plead for help, but when the spirits open their mouths, not a sound escapes, because their tongues have been ripped out from the backs of their throats. Other locals recount the story of the spray paint that persists in appearing on one of the building's exterior walls. One day, the words "Demon Hotel" were found painted on a sheet of wood that barred people from entering one of the broken doors. Fearing this ominous proclamation gave the neighborhood an unsavory appearance that would be bad for business. The local businesses association painted over it. Sometime later, however, the words reappeared through the fresh coat of paint. More paint was applied to the wood, but once again the words came back. This happened time and again, defying all logic. Since its construction in 1910, the apartment had seen more than its fair share of tragedy and death. A search of the newspaper archives reveals that in 1926, a resident of the building, Charles Seymour, was struck and killed by a streetcar when crossing Hargrave and Broadway. 7 years later, Mary Sue Burns ran out of the apartment and was killed by a passing Winnipeg Electric Company truck. In 1973, Lorraine Joan Bashinsky was stabbed to death in the building. Despite the bloody history and the all too apparent signs that something terribly evil dwelled there, Urban Explorer could no longer resist the call to sneak in to take some pictures of the building's innards. When no one was looking, he snuck inside as the sun was beginning to set. He slowly, hesitantly crept along a dark, dingy corridor. Paint was peeling off the walls and the floor was covered in dirt and debris. His nose was immediately assaulted by a revolting smell he described as equal parts of decay and something else, something not of this world. As he walked deeper into the belly of the building, the temperature dropped rapidly. and it became unnaturally cold. He didn't hear any sounds other than his own heavy breathing and the scrape of his shoes, but that was about to change. The broken and dust-covered stairs creaked loudly as he climbed them. It must have been his imagination, but he could have sworn that he was being watched as he neared the second floor. And then he heard a soft yet distant sound rustling in the room ahead. Remarkably, he carried on. In the center of this large room, he stopped. The pungent odor intensified. The air grew colder. The rustling became louder. He took a few pictures, and then something creaked above his head on the third floor. The wind, he tried to convince himself, or an animal. But no, it was no use trying to fool his mind. What he had heard was the unmistakable sound of soft footsteps passing over broken floorboards. Although he nearly turned and fled, he forced himself to continue upwards. The footsteps grew louder and more distinct as he quietly climbed to the top. But then he accidentally kicked a broken piece of wood. It tumbled down the stairwell in a series of deafening bangs and crashes before it reached the bottom with a final, deadly crack. He froze. All was silent. Whatever he had heard on the third floor was no longer moving. Had it been his imagination? Suddenly a door slammed on one of the lower levels, the sound echoing up the staircase. Fortunately, he had spied a back stairwell. He had no intention of going back down the way he had come. He turned on his flashlight and made his precarious way down. He reached the main floor without incident, but as he peered a little farther down into the basement, he felt a cold blast of air rush up from below. His flashlight flickered ominously. He should have left then and there. But some mad idea had taken shape in his head. He had come this far and seen nearly all of the Demon Hotel. All but the basement. He decided on a whim that he would go a little farther. He went downstairs. The nightmare basement was straight out of a horror movie. Crumbling stone walls, rusted pipes, wires and hooks dangling from the low ceiling, dark holes in the floor, and walls that might have held 100 unseen terrors, ugly, unmentionable stains splattered in the corners. After passing through a labyrinth series of narrow halls and filthy rooms, he was overcome by an oppressive feeling of dread. He needed to get out immediately. He turned to backtrack out of the basement, but quickly became disoriented and lost. His flashlight flickered once, twice, and then shut off completely. The blackness pressed in on all sides, and he couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. As urban explorers stumbled through the dark, praying to find the exit, an evil aura suddenly filled the air, as strong and real as the cold. A spirit he described as powerful and grotesque slammed into his body, threw him against one of the crumbling stone walls, and pinned his back against it. He fell to the ground and looked around wildly. His eyes landed upon his first stroke of good luck since he had bravely, perhaps foolishly, entered the Demon Hotel at dusk. The staircase was straight ahead. He picked himself up and ran as fast as his legs could carry him, up the stairs, out the door, and into the night. He didn't stop running until he was far away. He never looked back. In a bizarre, macabre twist, the Demon Hotel burned to the ground on April 6, 2015. The fire was blamed on teenage arsonists, but that hasn't stopped the locals from continuing to tell stories and to speculate as to what really happened on Hargrave Street. Many saw the faces and bodies of demons in pictures of the blaze that appeared on social media. Some believe the teens might have snuck into the building on an innocent dare, but then became possessed by the spirits that lurked within and set fire to the building against their wills. Others were thankful to see the cursed building reduced to cinders and ash, but dreaded the possibility that the fire had released the ghosts into the city to find new homes. No one wants to think that the maze-like tunnels and rooms of the basement still sit beneath the earth, waiting for some unfortunate soul to discover them. One thing is certain, the man who goes by the name Urban Explorer will forever wish that he hadn't explored the urban decay of the Demon Hotel. Museum of the Paranormal, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario. People come from all over the country, even from around the world, to see her, day in and day out. She sits on a small black rocking chair. The rocker, wreathed in shadow, is cornered away in the attic. She waits silently, her skin cracked and her eyes glassy as people stare, ogle and point at her. Her name is Lizzie, and she's the prime attraction in the Museum of the Paranormal. Lizzie is a doll, but not the type you used to play with when you were younger. Lizzie is haunted. Stephanie Cumerlato, who owns the museum with her husband, recalls the day Lizzie was donated to them. The previous owners were scared and agitated and needed to rid themselves of Lizzie's haunting presence. Their fear had reached an all-time high. They couldn't keep Lizzie in their house a single day longer. Every time they looked at Lizzie's oddly human face, Lizzie would look back, and then a wink, as if sharing some sick, private joke. Stephanie gladly accepted Lizzie and displayed her in the attic. Lizzie settled in and spent her days and nights with, among other attractions, Boris, the real living tarantula, a collection of authentic Ouija boards, and the museum's collection of rare post-mortem photography. And yes, post-mortem photography is exactly what it sounds like, photographs of dead people, often from the Victorian era, when families would take pictures of their deceased relatives. People know they're being watched as soon as they set foot in the creaky attic. Lizzie's eyes follow visitors as they propelled by a dark, evil energy. One evening, Stephanie was on the main level when a woman came down from the attic and said in a terrified hush that Lizzie had winked at her. An hour later, another woman entered the museum, climbed the stairs, and returned looking as pale as a ghost. Although the second woman didn't know the first woman, nor any of the stories surrounding Lizzie, she told Stephanie that Lizzie had winked at her too. But ghostly goings-on were prevalent in the museum long before Lizzie moved in. The building, dating back to the 1920s, used to be a blacksmith's shop. Tragedy struck the business when the blacksmith's daughter stood too close to the fireplace. A spark flew out from the hearth and ignited the girl's dress in a roaring blaze. Despite attempts to save her life, the girl died. After the blacksmith passed away, people began seeing him and his daughter lingering in the building. Today, lights flicker on and off, faces peer out from the windows after the museum is locked up, and the piano is often heard playing when no one is seated at it. One day, a little boy pointed at the stairs and asked, "Who is that girl standing on the stairs?" No one else could see anyone there. Another time, a woman innocently told the Camelados, "You know you have a ghost. She's standing beside the piano." Like the boy, the woman was the only person at the time who could see the forlorn ghost girl. A friend of Stephanie's was painting the staircase when a haunting face suddenly peered through the banister with a sinister grin. On another occasion, Stephanie's mother was helping her close the museum. It was late. They were all alone, and it was pitch black. Stephanie remembered she had to feed Boris the tarantula some crickets, so they climbed up to the attic. After the task was done, they left Boris and Lizzie and made their way back home. But suddenly a powerful cold blast of air hit them head-on, and Stephanie's mother gasped in fright. Stephanie assumed she had been startled by the inexplicable breeze, but that wasn't what had caused her fear. Her mother explained that someone had grabbed her hand and pinned it against the banister. Stephanie then heard the disembodied voice of a young girl talking and laughing as if the ghost was playing a practical joke. One can only assume that Lizzie, sitting as still as a statue in the darkness above, might have winked in approval. Don't Let Go, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Everyone loves playing in the school playground during recess. Everyone other than the children at St. Ignatius School. They avoid their school's rings at all costs. They know that to cross them is to cheat death, or more specifically, to cheat the girl who haunts their school's playground. And she's not a girl to be trifled with. Not too long ago, a young boy approached the red rings with caution and a hint of fear. Although they weren't too high off the ground, a fall from the height coupled with an awkward landing could break a bone or twist an ankle. A small crowd had formed around the boy to see if he'd made it across. He couldn't back down, not with so many eyes on him. The last thing the boy wanted was to be branded a coward, so he reached out a shaking, tentative hand and gripped the first ring. And then, swallowing his doubts and fears, he stepped off the ledge of the play structure, reached out his other hand and grabbed the second ring. Amazing even himself, he didn't fall. As he swung from ring to ring, his blood pumped harder and his smile grew wider. He was actually going to make it. But then, just when he reached the halfway point, someone grabbed his legs. He panicked and paused, struggling to hold onto the rings. The hands clawed up, from his feet to his shins to his knees, pulling down as if trying to rip him free from the rings. The boy had to hold on with all his might and nearly lost his grip, but after summoning all his strength, was able to hang on tight and fend off whomever had tried to hurt him. He looked down and was shocked to see that there was no one beneath him. Without wasting another second, the boy swung across the remaining rings and reached the safety of the other side. His friends were impressed and congratulated him for making it across, but he demanded to know who had tried to pull him down. His friends were dumbfounded. They hadn't seen anyone go near the boy. Could the rumors be true? That was the only explanation the frightened boy and his equally frightened friends could think of. That a little ghost girl dwells on the playground with one simple mission in the afterlife: to pull children off their rings and to their deaths. Legend has it that one day long ago, a kindergarten girl was attempting to cross the rings when her hand slipped and she fell. Tragically, her head struck one of the blue poles of the play structure with so much force that she died before she hit the ground. Unwilling to leave the scene of her death, the little girl hides in the playground's shadows and waits and watches. Filled with jealousy and seething with anger, she flies out of hiding and tries to pull others off the rings. But before anyone can get a good look at her, she disappears. Opened in 1912 and run by the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, the school has seen its fair share of challenges, from surviving the financial hardships of the Great Depression and the World Wars to a 2007 electrical fire that burned down the oldest remaining wing of the building. But enrollment is high and the school is alive and well. Alive except for the girl who would rather increase the playground's ghost population than see any children accomplish what she could not. The children of St. Ignatius still warn each other to stay away from the red rings, and if someone is brave or foolish enough to try to cross them, the dire warning is clear and simple. Whatever you do, don't let go. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.